The bullet tore through my chest before I even heard the shot. One moment I was walking across the base parking lot after my afternoon shift, keys in hand, thinking about what I might have for dinner. The next moment, an explosion of pain erupted through my ribcage, and I was on the ground staring up at the cloudless blue sky as it began to darken around the edges. I heard shouting, footsteps pounding against asphalt, someone kneeling beside me, pressing something against my chest. The pressure hurt worse than the initial impact, but I couldn't find my voice to tell them to stop. "Stay with me, Lieutenant. Miller, get the medics now!" I recognized Sergeant Rodriguez's voice, but it sounded far away, as if he were calling from the end of a tunnel. I tried to focus on his face hovering above me, but my vision was blurring, the edges growing darker. "Lieutenant Jackson, James, look at me, man." I wanted to tell him I was trying, but my mouth wouldn't work. Something warm and wet was spreading beneath me, and I was suddenly very cold despite the afternoon heat. Strangely, the pain was beginning to fade, replaced by a heaviness that seemed to drag me downward. I heard sirens in the distance, but they seemed to be getting further away rather than closer. Then Rodriguez's face disappeared, and the blue sky above me began to fade. My last conscious thought was simple. This is it. I'm dying. Then everything went black. I became aware again suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch. The pain was gone. The cold was gone. I felt weightless, completely free. When I opened my eyes, I was looking down at my own body. It was the strangest sensation I've ever experienced, like watching a movie of myself while simultaneously being fully aware that the broken, bloody figure on the asphalt was me. Sergeant Rodriguez was kneeling beside my body, his hands pressed against my chest, now stained crimson with my blood. 2 other airmen were running toward us, and a medical team was racing across the parking lot, pushing a gurney. "They can't hear you," a voice said beside me. I turned, or rather, my consciousness shifted, and found myself looking at a man in a simple Air Force uniform. He wasn't anyone I recognized from the base, but his presence felt calming, familiar somehow. "What's happening?" I asked, surprised that I could speak without a body. "You've been shot," he said simply. "Your physical form is dying." I looked back down at the scene below. The medics had reached my body now. They were working frantically, cutting away my uniform, attaching monitors, inserting IVs. I could hear their urgent voices. "GSW to the chest. BP's crashing. We're losing him. Start compressions." I watched as one of the medics began CPR, pushing rhythmically on my chest while another placed a mask over my face, squeezing a bag to force air into my lungs. "Am I dead?" I asked the man beside me. "Not yet," he replied, "but your time in that body is ending." I felt strangely calm about this news. There was no panic, no desperate desire to return to my body, just a peaceful acceptance. "What happens now?" I asked. The man, who I now understood must be some kind of guide or angel, smiled gently. "Now, we go." He extended his hand, and without hesitation, I took it. The moment our hands touched, the scene below us began to fade. The frantic medical team, my broken body, the base parking lot, all of it dissolved like mist in the morning sun. In its place, a soft, pulsing light began to grow around us, enveloping us completely. I felt myself being drawn forward, moving without walking. We were traveling through what seemed like a tunnel of light, moving at incredible speed yet perfectly still at the same time. The sensation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, exhilarating and peaceful simultaneously. As we moved through the tunnel, I became aware of a presence ahead. Someone, was waiting for us at the end of this passage. I could feel a love so powerful, so all-encompassing, that it seemed to pull me forward like a magnet. I wanted nothing more than to reach that presence, to be embraced by that love. The light grew brighter, more intense, yet it didn't hurt my eyes. Instead, it seemed to fill me, passing through me, illuminating places within me I hadn't known existed. Then suddenly, we were there. The tunnel opened into the most magnificent garden I could ever imagine. This wasn't just any garden. This was what Eden must have been like before the fall, what paradise truly means. The colors alone were beyond description, hues I'd never seen before, colors that don't exist on Earth, all vibrating with a life and energy that made them seem to sing. The grass beneath my feet, somehow I had feet again, though not a physical body as I'd known it, was the most perfect emerald green, each blade distinct yet part of a harmonious whole. Trees with silver-white trunks rose majestically around us, their leaves shimmering with golden light. Flowers of impossible beauty bloomed everywhere, their petals unfolding in patterns that seemed to contain mathematical perfection. A gentle breeze carried scents so sweet and pure they brought tears to my eyes, if I still had eyes to cry with. It was as if I could smell color, taste light, and hear beauty. All my senses were heightened, blended, transformed. Water flowed through the garden in crystal streams that sparkled with prismatic light. The water seemed alive somehow, conscious and joyful. Everything here was alive in a way nothing on earth had been. Even the stones glowed with an inner light, pulsing gently like heartbeats. "Where are we?" I whispered, though my voice seemed to carry without sound. My guide smiled. "This is just the beginning," he said, "a place of transition." "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," I said, overwhelmed by the perfection surrounding me. "Beauty is truth here," he replied. "Nothing is hidden, nothing is false." As we walked through the garden, I noticed other beings moving among the trees and flowers. Some appeared human, others less so, forms of light and color that shifted and changed as they moved. All of them radiated peace and joy. Some nodded to us as we passed, and I felt their greetings like gentle touches on my consciousness. There was no fear here, no suspicion or judgment, only acceptance and love. My guide led me to a path made of what looked like mother of pearl, iridescent and glowing from within. As we followed this path, the garden gradually opened into a vast meadow filled with flowers that seemed to be made of living light. In the distance, I could see mountains that shimmered like opals against a sky of the deepest, most perfect blue. And then I saw him. He was standing in the center of the meadow, and though he appeared as a man, I knew instantly, with absolute certainty, who he was. Jesus. He didn't look like the paintings and images I'd seen throughout my life. His appearance was Middle Eastern, with olive skin and dark curly hair that fell just past his shoulders. He wore simple white garments that seemed to glow from within. But it was his eyes that captivated me, eyes of such depth and warmth that they seemed to contain galaxies. The moment I saw him, I felt known. Completely, utterly known. Every thought I'd ever had, every action I'd ever taken, every joy and sorrow I'd ever experienced. He knew me better than I knew myself, and yet his gaze held nothing but love. Perfect, unconditional love. My guide stopped a few paces away, and I found myself unable to move forward. Not out of fear, but out of awe. How could I approach him? I was so small, so flawed, so unworthy. As if hearing my thoughts, Jesus smiled, a smile that contained such compassion and joy that it seemed to illuminate the entire meadow even more brightly. "James," he said, and my name in his voice was like music. He opened his arms in welcome, and suddenly I was moving forward, drawn to him as surely as iron to a magnet. When I reached him, he embraced me, and in that moment, I experienced what can only be described as coming home. Every cell of my being recognized him, resonated with his presence. This was what my soul had been searching for my entire life without knowing it. The love that flowed from him into me was beyond anything I could have imagined. Not just emotional love, but a tangible force that washed through me like liquid light, healing wounds I hadn't even known I carried. In his embrace, I felt every mistake forgiven, every burden lifted, every question answered without words. When he finally released me, stepping back to look at me with those infinite eyes, I fell to my knees, overcome. "Lord," I whispered, the only word my overwhelmed consciousness could form. "Rise, James," he said, his voice like water flowing over stones, both gentle and powerful. "You have nothing to fear here." He extended his hand, and as I took it, I rose to my feet. Standing before him, I felt both smaller than I'd ever been and more significant than I'd ever dreamed. "You have questions," he said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. I had so many questions that they tumbled over each other in my mind, but what came out was, why am I here? Am I dead? Jesus gestured to a stone bench beside a bubbling spring that I hadn't noticed before. We sat together, and it struck me how utterly natural it felt, sitting beside the creator of the universe, as if we were old friends meeting in a park. "Your physical body is between worlds," he explained. "What you call life and death are not as separate as humans believe. They are doorways, transitions from one state of being to another." He dipped his hand into the spring beside us, and the water seemed to dance around his fingers, responding to his touch like a living thing. "Why was I shot?" I asked. "Was it random, or was it meant to happen?" "Nothing is random, James," he replied, looking at me with infinite patience. "Everything has purpose, though that purpose is often hidden from human understanding. The man who shot you was acting from his own pain and darkness. He chose to bring harm, but what was meant for evil, I can use for good." I thought about the shooter, whoever he was. "Will he be caught?" "Yes," Jesus said simply. "His actions will have consequences in the physical world. But more importantly, this event opens a door. For you, for him, for many others, whose lives will be touched by what happens next." The way he said it made me realize, this wasn't the end of my story. "Am I going back?" I asked, surprised by the mixture of disappointment and anticipation I felt at the thought. Jesus smiled again, and the radiance of it was almost overwhelming. "You have more to do, James. Your mission is not complete." "My mission," I echoed. "I don't understand. I'm just an Air Force lieutenant. I work in communications. I'm not special." The look he gave me then went straight to my soul. "Every life I create is special, James. Every soul has a purpose. Some are called to quiet lives of steady faithfulness, others to moments of great courage, still others to extraordinary gifts. But all are valuable beyond measure." He reached out and placed his hand over my heart, or where my heart would have been in my physical body. At his touch, I felt a surge of warmth and light spreading through my chest. "I am giving you a gift," he said. "A gift of healing, not just for bodies, but for souls." The warmth intensified, becoming almost too much to bear, yet also exquisitely beautiful. I gasped as images flashed through my mind, people with various ailments and injuries, their pain visible to me as dark shadows within their bodies, my hands touching them, light flowing from me into them, the shadows dissolving. "Why me?" I managed to ask through the overwhelming sensations. "Because you asked," he said simply. "Not with words, but with your heart. Throughout your life, you have felt others' pain deeply. You have wanted to help, to heal, to make whole. This desire is a reflection of my heart." The visions continued to flow, not just of physical healing, but emotional and spiritual healing as well. I saw myself speaking words that somehow untangled knots of pain in people's hearts, bringing clarity to confusion, hope to despair. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, humbled by the magnitude of what he was showing me. "You will not do it alone," he assured me. "I will be with you, working through you. The power is not yours, but mine flowing through you when you allow it." As the visions faded, I felt a deep sense of purpose settling into me. Not a burden, but a joyful anticipation, like receiving a gift I'd always wanted without knowing I wanted it. "There is much more I could show you," Jesus said, "much more I could tell you. But human consciousness can only contain so much of eternity at once. What you need most now is to remember the truth when you return." "The truth?" I asked. "That you are loved," he said. "That every human soul is precious beyond measure. That suffering is not the end of the story. that death is not to be feared, that my light is stronger than any darkness. As he spoke these words, each one seemed to inscribe itself on my very being, becoming part of me in a way I couldn't explain. "Will I remember this?" I asked, suddenly afraid that this entire experience would vanish like a dream upon waking. "You will remember what you need to remember," he said. "Some details may fade, as the human mind tries to make sense of experiences beyond its capacity. But the essential truth will remain." He stood, and I rose with him, feeling both reluctance to leave this place and a growing understanding that I had a purpose to fulfill. "Before you return," Jesus said, "there is something I want to show you." With those words, the garden scene around us dissolved, and we were suddenly standing in what appeared to be a vast library. But instead of books, the shelves held what looked like glowing orbs of light, each one pulsing with its own rhythm, its own color. "These are lives," Jesus explained, gesturing to the countless orbs stretching as far as I could see in every direction. Each one a story being written, moment by moment, choice by choice. He led me to a particular section where one orb glowed with a familiar pattern that somehow I recognized as my own. "Watch," he said. As I gazed at my life orb, it expanded, enveloping us both. Suddenly, we were witnessing scenes from my life, not just watching them, but experiencing them again, from a new perspective. I saw myself as a child, crying after a falling out with my best friend, feeling the sharp pain of betrayal. I saw myself as a teenager, standing at my grandmother's funeral, trying to be strong for my grandfather. I saw myself taking the oath when I joined the Air Force, feeling a mixture of pride and trepidation. I saw countless small moments, kindnesses I'd extended, hurts I'd caused, opportunities I'd missed, joys I'd embraced. But I wasn't experiencing these moments as I had the first time. Now I was seeing them from a higher perspective, seeing how each event, each choice, had shaped me and those around me. I saw ripple effects I'd never been aware of, how a word of encouragement I'd given a fellow airman had helped him through a dark time, how a moment of impatience had wounded someone more deeply than I'd known. Most striking of all, I could see Jesus' presence throughout my life. In moments when I'd felt completely alone, he had been there. In times of joy, he had been rejoicing with me. In times of struggle, he had been supporting me, even when I didn't acknowledge him. "You have never been alone," he said gently, "not for a single moment." The scenes shifted, moving beyond my past into what I somehow knew was my potential future, or futures, because I saw multiple pathways branching from the present moment. In some, I embraced the gift of healing he had given me, and the light from my life orb connected with hundreds, even thousands of others, creating a beautiful web of influence. In others, I turned away from the gift, fearful or disbelieving, and while my life still had meaning and purpose, the web of connections was smaller, dimmer. "These are possibilities," Jesus explained, "not fixed destinies. Your choices matter, James. They always have." The visions faded, and we were back in the garden, standing once again in the meadow of light. I felt both humbled and empowered by what I had seen, the significance of seemingly small choices, the interconnectedness of all lives, the constant loving presence of God throughout it all. "It's time," Jesus said, his eyes filled with both love and a kind of holy sorrow. "You must return now." I wanted to stay. Every fiber of my being wanted to remain in his presence, in this place of perfect peace and beauty. But I also felt a new resolve, a purpose that pulled me back toward life. "Will I see you again?" I asked. His smile was radiant. "I am always with you. Even when your physical eyes cannot see me, I am there. And yes, when your time on earth is truly complete, you will return here. This is not goodbye, James. It is only until we meet again in this form." He placed his hands on my shoulders, and I felt a blessing flowing through me, strengthening me for what lay ahead. "Remember," he said, "the gift I have given you is not for your glory, but for mine. Use it with humility, with love, with wisdom. There will be those who doubt, those who fear, those who seek to use you for their own purposes. Trust what you have experienced here. Trust me. I will, I promised, knowing in that moment that regardless of what awaited me upon my return, my life would never be the same. Jesus embraced me once more, and in that embrace, I felt all the love of heaven pouring into me, filling every part of my being with light. Go now, he whispered, and heal in my name. The garden began to fade around me, the light dimming, Jesus' form becoming translucent. I felt myself being drawn backward, away from him, away from the garden, back through the tunnel of light. The last thing I saw was his face, full of love and promise, before everything went dark once more. Pain was the first sensation that returned. Sharp, overwhelming pain in my chest that made me gasp. The gasp itself hurt even more, sending spikes of agony through my ribcage. Beeping machines, the antiseptic smell of hospital, voices, urgent and surprised. He's back. We've got rhythm. BP's rising. Lieutenant Jackson? Can you hear me? I forced my eyes open, the harsh fluorescent lights assaulting my vision after the gentle radiance of the garden. A doctor was leaning over me, her face a mask of professional concern mixed with astonishment. Lieutenant, you're in the hospital. You've been shot. Do you understand? I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the breathing tube they must have removed. I managed a small nod instead. You were clinically dead for 15 minutes, she continued, checking my pupil response with a penlight. It's remarkable that you're back with us, much less conscious and responsive. 15 minutes. It had felt like both an eternity and a mere moment in that other realm. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures, questions, examinations. I learned that Sergeant Rodriguez had kept pressure on my wound until the medics arrived, that I had been rushed into emergency surgery, that my heart had stopped on the operating table, that they had tried to resuscitate me for far longer than protocol dictated before finally calling my time of death. And then, inexplicably, as they were preparing to note the official time, my heart had started beating again. Medically speaking, it doesn't make sense, the surgeon told me later, shaking his head in bewilderment. The bullet pierced your heart. The damage was catastrophic. Even if we'd managed to restart your heart immediately, the blood loss alone should have caused irreversible brain damage. He studied the monitors beside my bed, which displayed strong, steady, vital signs. Yet here you are, not only alive, but apparently recovering at an unprecedented rate. I've been practicing medicine for 27 years, Lieutenant, and I've never seen anything like it. I wasn't surprised. I knew who had healed me. The question now was how much to share about my experience. In that moment, I decided to keep it private, at least until I understood more about the gift I had been given and how I was meant to use it. The doctors kept me in the ICU for 3 days, running countless tests, all of which showed the same inexplicable results. My heart was healing at an accelerated rate, showing minimal damage from an injury that should have been fatal. On the 4th day, I was moved to a regular room. It was during my 2nd week of recovery that my gift first manifested. A nurse named Sarah was checking my vitals, her movements slow and pained. Without thinking, I reached out and touched her wrist. Your back is hurting you, I said, not a question but a statement. I could somehow see the inflammation around her lower spine, glowing like an angry red beacon. She looked startled, then nodded. As my fingers remained on her skin, I felt a warm current flow through me, from my chest, down my arm, and into her. Sarah gasped, her eyes widening as the pain that had plagued her for years suddenly vanished. She backed away, confused and frightened, muttering something about needing to check on another patient. Word spread quickly after that, despite my attempts to keep what had happened private. A janitor with crippling arthritis. A doctor's child with leukemia, brought in after hours. A fellow patient with a brain tumor deemed inoperable. They came to me, first in secret, then more openly, as the miraculous healings couldn't be explained away or hidden. With each healing, I grew more confident in the gift, learning to direct the energy flowing through me, understanding better the patterns of disease and injury as they appeared to my enhanced perception. I never took credit, always explaining that I was merely a conduit for God's healing power, remembering Jesus' words, "Not for your glory, but for mine." The military didn't know what to do with me. The shooting itself had been the work of a disturbed former airman with a grudge against command, not against me personally. He had been apprehended, but my miraculous recovery and subsequent healings created a dilemma for my superiors. Some saw me as a valuable asset, others as a potential public relations nightmare, still others as a security risk. Eventually, they offered me an honorable discharge, which I accepted, understanding that my path now lay elsewhere. The gift wasn't meant to be controlled or directed by military objectives. It was meant to heal those who needed healing, regardless of rank, status, or strategic value. 20 years have passed since that fateful day in the parking lot. I've traveled widely, establishing small healing centers in places of great need, training others who show similar gifts, for I've discovered I'm not alone in this calling. I've faced skepticism, accusations of fraud, even threats from those who fear what they don't understand. But for every doubter, there are hundreds whose lives have been transformed, not just by physical healing, but by the spiritual awakening that often accompanies it. I still see him sometimes, in dreams and quiet moments of prayer, that face of infinite compassion, those eyes that contain galaxies, and I know with absolute certainty that when my mission here is complete, he will be waiting for me in that garden of light, arms open and welcome, ready to bring me home again.